Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. In this video, we're going to revisit the Genitour after a recent pretty major change. They're having a bit of a moment in the spotlight when, a month or so back, they had their food cost dropped from 50 to 40, on top of getting an extra +2 versus Spearmen and their non-elite Pierce armor going up by +1 since Definitive Edition came out. They're definitely a lot more intriguing recently compared to the early days, and certainly compared to the very early days. The main question I want to look into is if Berbers and their allies have access to Genitours as well as regular elite skirmishers, when does each of those choices make more sense? Or is one strictly better than the other, either in Castle or Imperial? I'm not going to dwell on specific civ bonuses and how they affect each unit, as that list is very long and is probably unnecessarily complicated for our purposes here. I want to stay focused in this one on the skirmisher comparison and save the discussion of the best and worst Genitour civs as something to look at separately. That said, I am going to address some general questions, like what if you don't have bloodlines, thumb ring, or Parthian tactics? Does having access or not to those technologies change as a Berber ally whether or not you go for the Genitour? Of course, we're also going to look at both ages they're available in as well, as Genitours get an Imperial upgrade the Elite Skirmisher doesn't. So with all those goals in mind, let's start things off in Castle Age. Checking out their stats compared to the Elite Skirmisher, they're remarkably similar these days after the Genitour was given a bit more Pierce armor. The main trade-off is 1 extra range for +15 HP, though of course bloodlines can add another 20, which is why I bring up whether or not that's a deciding factor. Their cost, as I said, was recently dropped, so it's now just 25% more expensive, and of course neither unit costs any gold. We should also note here that the Elite Skirmisher has an upgrade cost as well, of 230 wood and 130 gold, while the Genitour comes ready right out of the gate in Castle Age. To go a bit deeper, both units also have a lot going on behind the scenes with bonus damage to archers and spearmen, with the skirmisher gaining an extra couple of bonus damage against cavalry archers specifically. Conversely, Genitours also take bonus damage from spearmen as well as some other anti-cavalry counters, since they're mounted, which is another important distinction. The fact they do bonus damage against spearmen and also take bonus damage means the question of whether or not they counter spears is a little complicated. Arguably, the biggest advantage the Genitour offers though is speed. They move about the same speed as a knight and lag slightly behind cavalry archers and camels, though obviously are much faster than skirmishers. Their speed can also be slightly enhanced with husbandry, which makes them slightly faster than shown here. Extra movement speed is great because it opens them up to be able to do hit and run. You do need a little bit of distance ahead of a unit to comfortably have time to fire, but still that speed lets you play around with a unit like spearmen in small numbers. Contrast that with the skirmisher's main advantage of having one more range, putting them on the same level as crossbows and mangonels. Now, speed can partly make up for a lack of range, but certainly with micro, it's range that kills, and Genitour can be at a bit of a disadvantage there. Their creation time is also pretty comparable at 22 versus 25 seconds, and both units benefit from archer upgrades and techs, while the Genitour also benefits from a couple of stable techs. Make a special note that its armor is upgraded by archer armor and not cavalry armor. Also important to note is that thumb ring has the exact same effect for both, with no increase to their attack rate, but a shift from 90% to 100% accuracy, making it not a critical technology to pick up. If either unit is exactly what you need, I wouldn't not make it because your civ is lacking thumb ring, and in fact, it's a lot of resources for a very small effect, if used for skirmishers or Genitours exclusively. Surprisingly, Parthian tactics doesn't apply to Genitours, so they're not treated as cavalry archers in that respect, and instead treated more like skirmishers. The two units also have the same minimum range and rate of fire, which helps keep things simple. That was a lot of basic information very quickly, but now let's see them in practice. Here, I'm going to focus exclusively on units they have a bonus against, as it is fundamentally a counter unit. Neither one has the base attack to really threaten things like knights, light cavalry, or even raid very effectively. I think for this, it's also important to separate Genitours without bloodlines versus with bloodlines into two different colors. Starting off simply head-to-head, the Genitours are doing 4 damage to the skirmishers while receiving 6 back, thanks to anti-cavalry archer bonus damage. Without bloodlines, they're about evenly matched, which resource-wise is to the skirmishers' advantage, while with bloodlines, it's roughly even when you factor in cost. To keep things organized, I'll have a running chart going with units we want to counter on the left, and in this case, countering skirmishers, we'll say your own skirmishers or Genitour with bloodlines would be fine and effectively an even trade. Switching now to a matchup against crossbows in a group setting, all are very effective with equal total resources, which makes a lot of sense as they're all anti-archer units. On this scale, it's hard to really differentiate between them, but on a one-on-one basis, you can see they're all doing the same 7 damage to crossbows while taking 1 damage in return. The higher Genitour HP means it is retaining a greater percentage of its HP though, so from these sorts of tests it actually comes out looking the best, though none of these are bad choices. To show I think it's not just effective but a standout best choice, I'll give the Genitour with bloodlines a gold star. It seems even without bloodlines though, Genitour are looking similar or slightly better than regular skirmishers against crossbows, at least when range isn't an issue. There may even sometimes be benefits to having short range, as they're a tanky unit that will naturally move in front of other ranged units that you control automatically. Next up, against pikemen, the skirmisher does 1 more damage because of slightly higher bonus damage, but the more important consideration here is spears and pikemen's massive bonus damage to Genitours. Up close, they take 2 or 3 hits depending on bloodlines, whereas the skirmisher takes 9. It really is worth keeping in mind that spear units only give a tickle to everything except cavalry, in which case they pack a real punch. In both short and long-range combat, it seems there's no question the skirmisher has the edge. Moving on to cavalry archers now, this is the most interesting one for me. First off, with equal numbers, it's pretty clear that any of the units win and are all good choices. All of them are an obvious counter with equal numbers, even Genitours without bloodlines, while all of these units also cost significantly less. I think it's more revealing though when we cut them down to just half as many resources as the cavalry archers have spent. This is a situation where a strong counter is going to hold up and a softer counter won't. And you can see the elite skirmisher and Genitour with bloodlines can be effective even with half the investment, whereas the Genitour without bloodlines can't keep up once we weigh things this much in the cavalry archer's favor. To view things on a more individual level basis, the skirmisher is dealing more damage per attack, but takes half as many hits as the Genitour with bloodlines. If all you're trying to do is counter cavalry archers in Castle Age, then Genitour with bloodlines are giving you mobility with the best cost efficiency, though you could completely defend the choice to go skirmisher if you prefer the greater range. As a quick side note here, I should point out that the camel archer is a much more versatile unit than the Genitour when it comes to raiding, and Berbers also have discounted camels, so they really have a lot of good options to answer cavalry archers in Castle Age, and it's almost hard to go wrong. It's really not surprising that one of the Mongols' worst matchups in open maps is the Berbers. Of course, we now also need to think about the new elephant archers for the Indian civilizations. Like regular cavalry archers, with balanced resources, all 3 perform very well, though the Genitour without bloodlines technically does the worst. Trying with balanced numbers instead, all 3 naturally lose, though the Genitour's pop efficiency here shines, and they put up a good fight, bringing a Dravidian elephant archer's HP down to 40%, while also costing less than half as much per unit. Putting the interaction under a microscope, the skirmisher is doing 14 damage as opposed to 12. You may notice the Genitour has no official extra anti-cavalry archer damage, but is still impacted by the elephant archer's new -7 cavalry archer armor. So basically, it's as if the Genitour have +7 damage appearing out of nowhere. While all 3 are good choices, again, I think the Genitour with bloodlines has a slight edge in cost effectiveness. Now, before we wrap up in Castle Age, I think we should talk a bit about the camel archer in a Berber mirror matchup. The camel archer is anti-cavalry archer and actually ends up being slightly cost-effective against the Genitour, while doing quite poorly against the regular elite skirmisher. Admittedly, this one can come down to how much you value gold, but the camel archer is also a much more versatile unit due to higher base attack. Similarly, the Genoese crossbow's anti-cavalry bonus damage makes skirmishers the far more ideal choice in that situation. That covers the major types of units that skirmishers would be intended to counter, though I think there are other considerations not captured in any of this testing. For example, Genitour I think make for an especially good combination with knights because of the added mobility while handling pikes, crossbows, or cavalry archers. Especially when ranged units are able to bottle up in a corner, that can be hard for knights to deal with, whereas having a few Genitours mixed in can actually add a threat to that tactic. At the same time, some players may prefer mixing in skirmishers with crossbows, especially against enemy crossbows, since they move at the same speed, so it's easy to manage and keep them together. I think it would be completely defendable to prefer the skirmisher's longer range, especially if your civilization doesn't have bloodlines. This was all for Castle Age though, so now let's see what, if anything, changes when we go to the Imperial Age. To start with, elite skirmishers are only improved by chemistry and blacksmith upgrades, whereas the Genitour have a moderately priced elite upgrade. That upgrade gives +5 HP and +1 attack, so it's not great at first glance, but there's a hidden +1 against archers and another +2 on top of that against cavalry archers and an extra 1 resistance to anti-cavalry archer bonus damage. That adds up to 3 extra attack against cavalry archers in Imperial Age that isn't obvious just by looking at their stats. Given we're now in Imperial Age, we also have to think about population efficiency, with as much as double the HP of the skirmisher and, of course, their extra mobility. Even fully upgraded Genitours still lag by 1 range though, at least for a generic civilization, and obviously with civ bonuses, a lot of these numbers can change, but we'll save all that nuance for another time. Starting things simple head-to-head, the Elite Genitour with Bloodlines is taking more than twice as many hits as the Elite Skirmisher, and even without Bloodlines, they're taking almost 60% more. Considering they only cost an extra 15 food per unit, you're definitely being compensated well for that. Certainly with Bloodlines, they more than hold up against Skirmishers, and even without Bloodlines, ending with a third of their HP left isn't a bad result, and all of this is a noticeable improvement over Castle Age. Switching now to how they do against arbalesters, it can actually be hard to tell in large fights which one is doing the best, since with equal resources, all 3 are excellent choices, and it just comes down to different shades of being highly effective. Scaling things back now to just half the resources spent as the arbalester side, the Elite Skirmisher with Bloodlines is the only one that still wins, though it's by a relatively small margin. I know the arbalester outranges them by 1, but it's hard to go wrong even against micro with that sort of value. Remember, we're talking about spending half as many total resources and no gold, so again, I think the Genitour with Bloodlines gets a gold star in this case as a standout. Switching out against halberdiers, in this case it takes 10 projectiles from any of the units, which is actually an improvement over Castle Age for the Genitour, though the halberdier also improves its bonus damage against them, so it's even more dangerous. Again, it's debatable and maybe even more so than Castle Age, just depends on whether you're able to keep them out of combat or not. Personally, I think the Skirmisher is the clear choice in this case. As for the heavy cavalry archer, in this case fully upgraded Japanese ones, Elite Skirmishers are doing a third more damage per attack, so they have the greatest damage output, but in return are much less hardy. Where I'd say the Skirmisher relies on cost efficiency and actually loses one-on-one, the Genitour, especially with Bloodlines, wins easily while costing only 2/3 of the cavalry archer's total resources and again no gold. Even without Bloodlines, this is not a bad trade, and Genitour are definitely a great weapon to have against cavalry archer units. With equal resources, obviously all 3 are highly effective, though I think any sort of Genitour makes much more sense. Consider even without Bloodlines, they're still beating cavalry archers one-on-one for a significantly lower cost. Here though, I want to pause, as I have to wonder about the camel archer. Officially, it's the Berber's anti-cavalry specialist, but costs 110 instead of 75 resources, so how much better is it actually against cavalry archers? On an individual unit basis, it's doing 12 damage instead of the Genitour's 6, while taking 14 instead of 25 hits in return. While it is hitting noticeably harder, it's also much less tanky, though of course it does regenerate HP with a unique tech, and has 12 instead of 8 attack, so it's definitely the more versatile unit and will hold up much better to counters and even regular cavalry. Against cavalry archers specifically though, the Genitour is actually giving objectively better value, especially when we start to consider gold. At the least, it's an interesting set of trade-offs, and again, I don't think either would be a bad response to cavalry archers. Finally, against the Elite Elephant Archer, again, all of the Genitour's anti-cavalry archer damage plus their extra HP makes them the clear better choice in my opinion, unless you're really sold on the Skirmisher's 1 extra range. The Elite Elephant Archers just have so much less HP left over that while the Skirmisher may be technically cost effective, the Genitour is what's gonna feel effective, coming surprisingly close to winning one-on-one. They would definitely be my preferred choice in that matchup out of the options available. Now, of course, there's a few anti-cavalry units, and for any of those, you'll clearly want to stick with the Skirmisher. Overall though, aside from a few good anti-cavalry counter units, the Genitour is looking like the clear choice over the Skirmisher in Imperial Age, even without giving its speed any extra weight. Like in Castle Age, I think Bloodlines is an important consideration, but mostly because it takes them from being something comparable in value to a Skirmisher to something a clear step above. Now, I realize this video is already getting kind of long, but we still have to address an obscure situation where you have an embarrassment of riches with both a Berber and Vietnamese ally. In that case, you have access to both the Genitour and the Imperial Skirmisher upgrade. Of course, everyone remembers the classic historical team-up of Berbers and Vietnamese to supply advanced weaponry to their Aztec allies. While it may not be a common situation in-game, let's quickly check if that reverses the results in favor of the Skirmishers. The upgrade itself actually gives a variety of nice effects, from +1 attack, +1 pierce armor, +1 against archers, and another +1 against cavalry archers. They may all be small effects, but those can sometimes add up. Head-to-head though, against Genitour with Bloodlines balancing out total resources, the Genitour wins, so initially it doesn't look like a major flip is happening, at least if you have Bloodlines available. Against arbalesters though, they both deal equal damage while taking almost exactly the same number of shots in return. In this case, I'd have to give the edge to the Imperial Skirmisher, as it's cheaper and has longer range while performing the same in combat. Contrast that with the Cavalry Archer though, as against that unit the Imperial Skirmisher has an offensive advantage but doesn't survive as many hits, and I still like the Elite Genitour with Bloodlines better here, if for no other reason than because of their extra speed. Maybe we'll say with Imperial Skirmisher and Elite Genitour with Bloodlines, it's more of a toss-up, and falls back to whether you like +1 range or extra speed, though with some anti-cavalry bonus damage that you have to think about. The Imperial Skirmisher upgrade though does seem to be able to close the gap, at least when it comes to cost efficiency. Altogether though, I have to say I like the current balance of the Genitour. The lower cost and extra buffs have made them more interesting in Castle Age, with some clear situations they're a step above of the regular Skirmisher, but also with some notable weaknesses. As for the Imperial Age, especially with Bloodlines, Elite Genitour is looking pretty strong. In the next video, we'll look at some of that civilization nuance though, and how some bonuses make them even stronger. And of course, we'll also look at some of the civs, which really got the short end of the javelin, and have some truly awful Genitours. That'll do it for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.